Well, good morning. If you would, turn in your Bibles. We will be finishing Mark chapter 9 this morning, so we'll be picking up in verse 33. And this section is actually a very interesting section for us. It's one of those sections of the Word that have kind of been ripped up throughout the years. And in all fairness, interpretation for this section is actually very difficult. So we're going to do it just a little bit differently this morning. We're going to read through the entire text and try and establish our context and our flow, and then we'll back up to the beginning. So in verse 33, then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What was it you disputed among yourselves on the road?" But they kept silent. For on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. And he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." Now John answered him, saying, "Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us, casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him, because he does not follow us." But Jesus said, "Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For he who is not against us is on our side. Whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, assuredly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands to go to hell into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame rather than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is good. But if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another." That's the fun road that's in front of us this morning. You can kind of see how people go in different directions through this text. So the purpose of us reading through all of it, I want to point out a couple of things just to kind of help you as a guide to stay on track as we move through the Word. And for those of you students, especially those of you that were going through our inductive Bible study class a few weeks ago, what is it that's drawing, or what is it that is driving this particular conversation? The disciples were having squabbles with one another over greatness. We've been learning about the king in the last several chapters. In this chapter, we're going to be learning about the kingdom, full of people within that kingdom, and how we're supposed to be interacting with one another in the kingdom. The disciples at this point were kind of having a little bit of a wrong relationship with one another. They're arguing over who was going to be the greatest. That is the whole premise of what it is we're getting into. How believers are interacting with one another. So Jesus picks up a child to illustrate kind of his point, how we're supposed to be interacting with one another and receiving one another. John the apostle understands the direction that Jesus is taking, because in verse 38 it says, "Now John answered him, there's somebody teaching, or somebody casting out demons rather, in your name we forbade him." So the disciples understand what Jesus is trying to do. The child is being likened to believers. So Jesus tells him there's no reason to forbid him from doing what he is doing, and we'll get into that as well. Verse 42, "But whoever causes," that word "but." So a lot of people teach this section of, well, this is what hell is going to look like. If there's something causing you to sin, this is what you need to do. And they teach it as a completely separate section. Jesus isn't using it as a completely separate section. This isn't a separate teaching. But whoever causes is tethering to that previous discourse. And in verse 50, have peace with one another. They're squabbling in the beginning. Have peace with one another. So 33 starts with them squabbling. The end of verse 50, have peace with one another. Chapter 10 starts off with them going to a new area. So to kind of understand a little bit the direction that we are going, it's going to help us a lot with interpretation when we get to the last two verses. Clear as mud? Fantastic. Verse 33, let's break it down. So he came to Capernaum. He was in the house, and Jesus asked him, what was it that you disputed amongst yourselves on the road? Oh, I love that. How many people are traveling with Jesus? Correct answer, we don't really know. At least 12. Second semi-correct answer, closer to 100. So there's a lot of people walking around on the road, kind of like we did yesterday. There's a group of us yesterday that got together for their cookie crawl. That was a circus. We had kids all over the place, and you go walking around downtown. For a lot of adults, you know, okay, it's a shop. It's a train. One of those shops had this great big Ferris wheel of a thing in the window. That was kind of cool. But when you're a child, what happens when a child gets excited? Oh, it's anarchy. There's no containing that bit of energy. So we're walking around as a group. Had my buddy Josh kind of in the front, floating from the front to the back. Cassie was kind of in the middle. Megan and I were in the back. We're doing everything we can to kind of corral all that. You can't hear anything. Josh is helping us navigate as we're looking at this map. And we're trying to figure out which shop we're going to go to next. And we're yelling at each other back and forth, trying to do whatever kind of smoke signals, hand and arm signals we can do. You can't hear anything when you're in a group like that. It's hard. And we weren't the only ones out there for the people all over the place. We had one of our kids, just kind of as kids do, we get distracted in the groups, don't we? We get distracted in the chaos. Kid looks up. Yep, okay, my people. Looks back down, starts following the wrong people. So we're crossing the street to the left. We look over, and one of the kids in our group is going with a whole different family. We like to think in the chaos that Jesus can't hear. Now, sometimes in our hurt, sometimes we feel like he can't hear, and we've been discussing that one quite a bit, but sometimes we're doing something that we should not be. We're having that conversation with a fellow believer that we really shouldn't be. They're having that conversation. I don't imagine, because you know they didn't want to answer Jesus in verse 34. They were ashamed of what they were talking about. So odds are they weren't at the front of the group discussing who's going to be greater. They're drifting back a little bit. Jesus still hears those conversations. They probably did not know that. Going into verse 34, they kept silent. Jesus is going to ask. He knows. When we are believers, we have the indwelling spirit, one of the perks of following Christ. So when we're doing something that's not very Christ-like, we're going to get a little prick in the spirit. Odds are they didn't have it when they were having their squabble, but Jesus asked them, what were you arguing about? They kept silent. They were ashamed to admit what it was they were arguing. What's our premise verse? For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And now they're arguing who's going to serve one another. The concept of greatness. We get obsessed with greatness, don't we? We get obsessed with something that puts us in a place above somebody else. We see it in the workplace. We see it in the world often. What is shameful, what does cause a whole heaping amount of extra hurt, is when we see it in the church. Oh, he's the pastor. He's extra special. Everybody should move out of the way as soon as he comes walking through, give a little curtsy and kind of oh, morning, pastor. Oh, it's the worship leader. So spiritual. There's only one way she got up there, or he, to be the worship leader. Extra spiritual, extra close to Jesus. Holier life than the rest of us. Oh, we're getting so many names in the church, I can't pick a name that's not going to get all weird. So there's so-and-so in the back of the church scrubbing toilets. Sucks for so-and-so. He must be less spiritual than the rest of them. So then when it comes time, it's like, we need help serving. And we really do. I I wasn't in here for the announcements this morning, but I'm sure Stephen covered them in great lengths. We need people for sound booth. We need people for children's ministry. We need people to help clean. The snow is coming. We need people to help deal with snow. But when we start levying one matter of service over the other one because of greatness and not calling, or just for the matter of serving, it brings problems. Why were they squabbling over this one? Odds are just kind of that spirit in them was rejuvenated at the Mount of Transfiguration. 3 of them went up, came back down. While they were told not to really be discussing it, their faces are going to be a little bit different. Their attitudes are going to be a little bit different, especially considering who went up on top of the mountain. You can just kind of imagine. And we've seen the squabbling in them. They come back down off the mountain. You remember that from the last chapter. And what's going on? I guess it's from the same chapter. They're coming down. So we were just with Jesus. We got to see him in his glory. We got to see Moses. We got to see Elijah. What were you guys doing down here? Oh, you failed in an argument with the scribes. Better work on your apologetics. And you couldn't cast out that. You'd never guess what we were doing. So now when they see Jesus in his glory and they're discussing the things that are coming as Jesus is making his way to the cross, the disciples are probably rejuvenated in that aspect of, the kingdom is coming. Who is going to be at his right hand? Well, it can't be you guys. You lost an argument to the scribes. Well, it can't be the other half of it because you failed to cast out a demon. If I was here, that demon, he'd have been out lickety-split. But instead, we were with Jesus up on the mountain. I should be at his right hand. You can kind of see where this squabbling is coming from. It's a place of service. Ministry means service. And they're fighting over it. They're obsessed with it. And they're failing. From what we saw in chapter 8, verse 15, he charged them saying, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." Their view of the kingdom that Jesus warned them about in chapter 8, that's where they're failing now. How does Jesus respond? Verse 35, and he sat down and called the 12 and said to them, that's awesome. Jesus in his patience with them and grace towards them and mercy, he sits down. What he's doing essentially, he's sitting down. He is purposing to teach them. That's something that we really could learn how to do, all of us. Not everybody's called to be a teacher in the same aspect that some of us are, but we should have a functioning knowledge of the gospel, of the word. So when we do have an issue and we pull somebody aside, hey, you shouldn't do that. We really do need to list the names. Where's Kyle? I know you can hear me. List the names of people that aren't here so I can use those names. My go-to is Bob, but we have a lot of Bobs in the church, so I can't use that one. Well, we should be able to sit him down and say, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's kind of against what Christ teaches. Well, my famous and favorite response is, well, why not? Where does it say that in the Word? Well, it's in there somewhere. We shouldn't have it's in there somewheres, and we should have this is where it is, this is what it says, and this is why it says it. So Jesus is sitting down and purposing to teach them. So he calls the 12 to them. He says, if anyone desires to be first, that's what we want to know, isn't it? In our jobs, or in our communities, or in events, or in competitions, we don't want to know, well, this is how you be last. Some of us already know how to do that. How to be last at a race. Run as fast as me. You will be last. We want to know how to be first because we want to know how to be great. Because our measure of greatness is different than the Lord's measure of greatness. So he says, anyone who desires to be first. It's not in the text, but I can just imagine there's a little pause for effect right there. You see the disciples kind of leaning in a little bit. Oh, I'm going to get this one right, and you are going to be last because I'm going to be first. If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. I can just imagine their faces kind of changing a little bit. How do you be first? By being last. Does that mean by being terrible at what it is that you're doing? No. This is a choice to replace pride with humility. This is a choice to put others ahead of yourself. And that's hard to do. Talking about interaction with one another and receiving one another. So what does that look like? This is what I really love about the teachings of Christ. It's like whatever was around him, he used as a teaching moment. The parable of the lost sheep. I can just imagine Jesus kind of sitting there and watching some poor kid chasing his sheep as that thing is darting off across the pasture. So Jesus took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." Kind of gives us the concept of an ambassador. How you receive even the lowest is how you would receive an ambassador. That's how we are as a family. That's one of the things that really drew me into Calvary Chapel. All of the churches and the fellowships that I've been to as a child, it was very rigid, very strict, very regulated. Suit and a tie, certain kinds of greetings. I don't know if anybody else has ever done Toastmasters or any kind of speech training or whatever it's called. There was a certain way you had to sit, unseat, be seated, greet one another. If you're being called up to the podium, there's this intricate process of how you receive one another and one guy walks up. If you mess it up, you're doing it in front of a whole bunch of people. It's just super awkward. I'm very introverted, even though most of the time it doesn't seem that way. I don't like all that process. Plus, it's very embarrassing when you get it wrong. How many people know how to actually put silverware on the table? One of you? Kudos. 3 of you? I don't. There's actual spoons and forks for very certain things of the meal. I'm a big guy, and I like big portions of food. I'll grab the biggest fork, and I'll use it for a pea. And I get looked at weird. It's very uncomfortable. The first time I went to Calvary Chapel, I was still just dressed like how I was, had my slacks on and had a tie. There was a clip on. Only recently have I learned how to tie one. But I go in, they just received me like family. Because that's what we are. And it's important that we see it that way. So let's go back to what he's using as a correlation. He uses a child. Matthew kind of expounds on this one a little bit. He says, whoever, you need to receive the kingdom as a child will receive the kingdom. So one, we have that complete dependence on God. Well, how does a child look at their parents? Complete dependency. Not just for the physical things, but for the spiritual things, for the emotional things. So that's one aspect to look at it. But another one, you don't see the child in that place of humility trying to get ahead within the body. I love the simplicity of a child's heart, especially within the church. How they're interacting. Or even their answers. You ask a child, how do you get to heaven? How do you go to heaven? Generally, their answer is Jesus. That's it. That's their response. It's not until we get older we start putting a bunch of other weird stuff on top of it. How many times do you go to church? How do you address when you go to church? How do you pay your tithes? Oh, you only pay 10% of your tithes? I'd do 11, just in case. We do all the weird stuff. Oh, you sit in the back? I sit in the front. I make sure I get every little last bit of it. The child's answers are always just the best answers. But how do they receive them? This is one of the hardest passages personally for me in all of the Word. I'm used to a very certain kind of leadership. That's a dominant one. My way, the highway. If you're going to be a problem, you're going to get crushed a little bit. Get in line. I'm very still military in some aspects. That's why I have a lot of people in my life to kind of correct that line of thinking a little bit. The concept of the leader is the hard one. You had to be the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, the smartest. Those individuals are typically the ones that are the least approachable. Who's afraid to approach a child? Generally nobody. Obviously we have the 1%, that child's, hard or combative or a kung fu warrior or has got an aim with a piece of fruit like it's nobody's business. I get it. But generally, approaching a child is not hard. One of my favorite things on Sunday morning, I enjoy greeting all of you, so please don't take this personally, but I really enjoy greeting the kids. Oh, they're so much fun. Almost every Sunday that I get to come to church, one of the first people I typically see, one of the first children I see is Mia. She gets very excited to show me her new shoes or her new boots or her new dress, and she's just super excited about it. Kids are so much fun because they have all of this energy. They want it. They want to unload it. They want to discuss their weekend. They want to discuss their cookies. They want to discuss their new shoes. They want to discuss the new ornament they put on their Christmas tree. Do we receive people in that way? Are we approachable in that way? Apparently, on me, I've just got a resting face that tells you, just stay away from me. I don't know how many conversations I've had with people within the body. It's like, the first 6 months I was here, I thought you just hated me. I was like, oh, and I'm the pastor. It didn't come to light until I was working. I have customers that really do like me because they have kind of a wrong assessment of my character. It's like, man, Wage is just super angry today. And Richard, my boss, pulled me aside and said, no, that's just Wage. That's just what he looks like. He's fine. That concept was very hard for me because to be a leader, you had to be bigger, stronger, faster, more upfront. You had to have a very command presence is what we are taught. You remember a few weeks ago we got into the Isaiah chapter 53 and it was talking about the appearance of Jesus. There was nothing about his appearance that were going to draw people to himself. I think that's one of the things that made him so approachable. So Jesus is using this kind of like the outline of the teaching. So verse 38. Now John answered him. So John understands that he's kind of correlating that concept that the child and how a child is supposed to be kind of how the believers are. So we're talking about believers. That's one of the more important things we need to kind of hang on to through this chapter. Talking about believers. So John answered him saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us, casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. So now we're dealing with this heart of sectarianism. Oh my goodness. All these different sects and all these different pieces and portions of the body kind of at war with one another. What is John saying? Lord, there is somebody who's not a part of the 12 and probably not a part of their immediate group. This could have been someone that was following John the Baptist, could have been a member of the 70 that is in his own kind of trajectory at this point in time. There's someone with enough faith and understanding of who Jesus is that he is successfully casting out demons. And they forbade him doing it because he wasn't a part of this group. That's almost like saying, well, there's someone in this that's not a part of this immediate fellowship here, out on the street corner heralding the gospel. So you can see how ugly that would be if someone from this fellowship went out there and said, you're not a member of Calvary Chapel, Baker City, so you shouldn't be up on the street corner talking about Jesus. Sounds pretty stupid when you put it in that terms. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't have a lifestyle of sin. He wasn't teaching or heralding or preaching a false gospel. He was doing something apart from the other body. We really, as a body as a whole, all over the world, need not be fighting against ourselves. A church divided and divisive has kind of put us in a part of the reason that we're in the season that we're in now. But why would John, now is this the only person that the disciples rebuked? Probably not. Why rebuke this one? Because he was doing something that they had just failed to do. They tried casting the demon out of the son when Jesus came down from the Mountain of Transfiguration. Disciples couldn't do it. But somebody else who's not even tethered to the group, they were doing it. Oh, the pride. And the self-glorification. Well, my church does it this way. I'm glad we have a way of doing things. As long as they're things that is God and Spirit filled and led and us called to do. Church might do something different, or they might do the same thing 2 miles away. Good. Baker City's 10,000 people. We can't reach 10,000 people. Great big churches bring great big problems. They bring gaps. There's not many of us in here, and we're missing some people. It's hard to minister to large groups of people. Some people like worship a different way. Some people like to read a different way. Some people don't like the New King James Version. They use something weird like the ESV. ESV is actually a fantastic translation. So he forbids them. Probably forbids them because of pride. That is what John is bringing up. So verse 39, but Jesus said, do not forbid him. For no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. He believes in Jesus. He's doing this work that you could only do empowered by Christ. That's fine. That's what he's supposed to be doing. And he says, for he who is not against us is on our side. If we could only view the churches that way. Now remember, we're still working on a biblical understanding of Jesus. If you are not working on that biblical understanding of Christ, yes, at that point you might want to reconsider what it is that you're doing. It's working with a lack of that has really put some of the churches in the mess that they're in. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, assuredly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Something so small, that smallest amount of kindness, it's going to be rewarded and it's going to be remembered eternally. Now remember, especially in this context, if someone gives you a drink in his name, so we're talking about a believer giving another blessing, gift, whatever to another believer, because you belong to Christ, you by no means you're going to lose your reward. There's a huge reward in that too. But what's important is this really should be a cord that binds us, is how Macdonald puts it. We belong to Jesus. This really should bind us together, and it should stop this party problem, this dissension problem. As Paul discussed it in 1 Corinthians, he was talking about, all of you say, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Paul. Well, I belong to Jesus. And they were tearing at one another. They were gravitating and magnetizing to a teacher or someone instead of to Christ, and it allowed division and a separating within the body. It's supposed to stop and to stamp out a bickering spirit. But it wasn't doing that for the apostles. They had that bickering spirit trying to figure out who was going to be greatest in the kingdom. And if they weren't specifically with them, then they had to be against them. But their math was wrong. So Jesus tells them even that smallest act of kindness is going to be rewarded. That smallest act of kindness is going to be remembered forever. That's important as we're rolling into this next section. If the smallest act or word, deed of kindness is rewarded and remembered eternally, what's on the other side of the coin? Do we pay attention to our words? Do we pay attention to what we are doing? Because both are going to be remembered eternally. Verse 42, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble or to fall in sin, is really what we're talking about, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. How carefully do we consider our words? What happens if we cause a fellow believer to stumble or to fall into sin? This is an especially heavy section because what is it that we're really discussing that's going to cause somebody else to fall into sin? Your bickering, your divisiveness, your self-glorification. That is really the context as we're moving into this section. He says if you're causing somebody else to stumble because of your infighting, it's better if a millstone was around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. That is heavy verbiage. Basically, there was two millstones. There was a little millstone that they could basically use by hand to grind things up. And there's another millstone, a much heavier one that took an animal to roll over. The big one is the one they're talking about. It's better for you if you were just had this thing tied around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Do we really consider how we interact with one another and how important our interaction is with one another? If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands, to go to hell into the fire that shall never be quenched. So verses 42 through 48, we have a lot. What first? So I guess the obvious one, first two things, do we confront our sin? Now, it's way easier to confront somebody else's sin. We have a whole bunch of that. I don't remember what Chuck Smith used, sin sniffers. We really like to confront somebody else's sin. Why? One, more often than not, it's the sin in us. Almost like a mirror. The sin in us, it might bother us a little bit. Boy, how does it bother us a lot when it's in somebody else? Well, I know exactly how to fix that. So we'd rather fix the speck in someone's eye, as Jesus pointed out, than deal with the log that is in our own. But do we confront the sin that is in our lives? And two, after we do confront the sin in our lives, are we willing to remove it? The Bible we're not teaching, not to be taken literal, self-mutilation. If your hand is causing you to sin, and you cutting off your hand, does that alleviate the problem? No. Sin does not start in the hand. The sin is a heart issue. But what's interesting is we're talking about the hand, the foot, and the eye. I suppose how I look at it, it's the 3 W's. The work, the walk, and the want. When we do have, especially those squabbles, it's kind of in some of those areas, isn't it? We do consistently fight over the work. We see some that seem to be glorified more than others, and we want that. We remember what happened to Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts. They saw what one gave, everything, and he went off on missions, fully devoted. And he saw how the church just laid hands on him, prayed, sent him out, and he got so much attention, which was not his intent. And he was sent out. Later on, he was sent out with Paul. So Ananias and Sapphira decided to do the same thing. They were going to sell everything, but they kept apparently a good portion of it for themselves and gave the rest, but made sure everybody understood that they gave the rest. And what happened? That sin was just bound to them. Peter said, you have grieved the Spirit. Why would you lie? It's your property. But they were doing it for themselves, and both of them fell down dead. So we do dispute over the work. We dispute over the walk. We're going to be talking about salt. We're going to be talking about preservation. There's just things that believers there's places that we shouldn't be going. There's things that we shouldn't be doing. There's things that we just shouldn't be looking at, which we'll continue to caveat on that point. I think also we see the aspect of that reaching the goal is worth any sacrifice. We're not talking about something literal. What are we talking about? Some sin is very hard to remove. And not just sin, but there's obstacles that are in front of us or we carry with us in our walk. They're really going to be stopping us from kind of reaching the goal. What is Jesus saying? What happens if you cut off your hand or pluck out an eye? We only have one foot. Things are just harder. But even as hard as you're going to make those things, it's better to remove them and to still reach your goal. Are we confronting and are we removing it? This is something that we have to choose to do. Just like choosing Anyone who desires to be first shall be last of all and servant of all. That is a choice because it's not in our nature. Some of us are just very not competitive. I consider myself to be very not competitive. I was wrong. On most fronts, I never, as a kid growing up, I never cared about sports. I just don't. I've played baseball, I've done wrestling, boxing, did a little bit of football. I've played sports, but I just never really cared. I'd rather been outside camping or fishing, or just doing something else. So the concept of putting my kids in sports, okay, I understand they need to work together as a team, whatever else. Man, when I attended my niece's volleyball game for the first time, I'm one of those weirdos screaming at refs and coaches. I'll play dodgeball with the kids. Something ugly just comes out. I understand they're a fraction of my age. I will not reduce velocity. I'll get mean to win. In my household, and it's one of my favorite things to do as a family, we have Nerf wars. It's great. My wife, not intentionally, she bought me this really juiced up Nerf gun. They hurt. My son was hiding behind the couch when I was up at the top of the stairs, and he couldn't really go anywhere. But all is fair. Son, if you come out, I'll let you pick a different hiding place. Not my proudest moment as a father, so he kind of stood up a little bit. Right in the forehead. Dad wins. Dad always wins. We understand how those things are dangerous. Man, how they're dangerous. So we see these three things really affecting how we are, our work, our wants, our walk, the things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Do they cause the believer to stumble? How we're interacting with one another. Do they cause the believer to stumble? One of the biggest turnoffs of people leaving church, and I have a lot of these people in my life, as we are witnessing to them, we're trying to share the gospel to them, they know the word. But they decided to no longer pursue a relationship with Christ. And why? Why not? Because the pastor will get up there for 30 minutes and start bad-mouthing one of the other churches. Not in truth. Not in grace. It's just a flat-out attack. In apologetics, we deal with certain things. Well, how can people say this about Mormons? Or about Jehovah's Witnesses? Or about Islam? Or about whatever? This is why. This is what I believe out of the Word. There's a difference between approaching it with grace, with truth, with compassion, instead of being on the attack. And it's been a huge turnoff for a lot of people. And he says, well, coupled with removing of the hand, removing of the foot, removing in the eye, he brings up in verse 44, 46, 48, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. We have two aspects to this one. The first, it's a very grotesque thing. Do we look at our sin that way? Do we confront our sin that way? It needs to be fully removed, or else. Or else what? So we see this concept of hell. We're going into hellfire where their worm does not die and their fire is not quenched. So let's dive into this one real quick. First off, that word for hell, that is Gehenna. And it's an actual place referring to the valley of Hinnom. And we see a large number of sacrifices. One of those sacrifices were to Molech. And that's where child sacrifices would take place. So we see a very ugly thing. But also, this area, this valley, that's where the remnant of the sacrifices would go. So on some of those great big occasions, David, or in consecration of the temple, or whatever it may be, at Passover, how many sheep were offered up? Thousands. What came out of all those animals? Everything else. the gut piles, the nasty stuff that wasn't a part of the sacrifice. Where did all that stuff go? It went there and set on fire. How unpleasing would that be? It's nasty. It says the flame is never going to go out. So the worm, the body never dies, but the fire is also never quenched. So one, it paints for us a very nasty picture of what sin is and what the outcome of that would be. 2, do we really believe that? Do we believe what it is that is spoken and written here, that it is never going to go out? Rarely we think about that one. What do we look forward to as believers, as a church? We look forward to that time when we caught up with Christ. We look forward to the time of the resurrection. I am ready for my resurrected body. I want clothes that are unsullied. Maybe it's selfish. I want a full head of hair again. I'm tired of limping around. It was another one of my favorite teachings of Chuck Smith. It's like, when you get to heaven and you're trying to hunt me down, don't look for the old fat bald guy. That's my old tent. You're going to find me with a full head of hair and a nice new bod. We're going to have resurrected bodies that are built for eternity. It's important to remember that you're not the only ones. Everybody will have that body built for eternity. The where is the concept. If we really, truly viewed this verse, 1, of how ugly sin is, but 2, that this is actually not going to go away. The worm will never die, and the flame is never going to go out. I don't know how else you can paint a perfect picture of eternity. One object is never going to die in a fire that's never going to go out. If we truly believe that verse, it would do 2 things for us. It would certainly change how we interact with one another, that we should be building one another up, that we should be encouraging each other. But 2, I think it would hasten the concept of you taking out the gospel or just sharing it with somebody. Well, what if I embarrass myself? One of the things I was taught as a kid, one of the things I was taught in speech classes is, you know what? If you look like an idiot, you're never going to see him again. Interesting concept, especially since we don't actually know how much time we have. Look like an idiot. Share the gospel. If you're worried about it, learn the word. Share the gospel. Verses 49 and 50. For everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is good. But if salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. To help with interpretation, what we really have to establish is who is everyone and what is fire. That's really kind of the big issue, isn't it? If we can't figure out who everyone is and what fire means, then we don't really have a solid interpretation through these 2 verses, and it kind of muddies up through the rest of it. So who is everyone? If it's talking about unbelievers, we see that fire is kind of a judgment fire, and a lot of people teach it that way because of verses 42 through 48. But through the whole text, what are we working with? We're working with believers in their interaction with one another. So we're working with believers for everyone. Then fire cannot mean that judgment fire, that final place, that final word for hell, which is Gehenna. It's the 5th one of the 5 words through the word used as hell. So everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. First, let's deal with fire. I believe that word for fire is discussing for us verses 42 through 48. Do we have self-judgment? Do we have self-renunciation? Renunciation? Renunciation. Do we have those things in our life? Even Paul talked about it. If you would judge yourself first, you wouldn't face a more harsh judgment. Do we have a strict spiritual discipline? Do we understand the necessity in our lives for discipline and renunciation? Typically, we don't. Nothing bad has happened so far, so I guess I'm going to keep doing it. It doesn't really hold me back that much. How many of us as believers have just something in our lives that we've tried to share the gospel with somebody else? It's been a hang-up. it's been a hindrance, it's been a problem, or it's been a turnoff. As a part of Calvary Chapel's policy, if you want to be a pastor or in public ministry for Calvary Chapel, 0 alcohol. No alcohol ever, no tobacco. That's kind of what we do. That was Chuck Smith's thing. I've bumped into a number of pastors that have no issue with alcohol and some of the influences that's had on the flock. And he's told me, he was like, well, I have no real concern about it. It doesn't affect me personally in the spirit. If there's people within the body, they have a hang-up about it, well, they can just go somewhere else. Is it a sin for even a pastor to have alcohol? If you're not personally convicted in the spirit by it, no. But if it causes somebody to trip over it, then yes. Even Paul, if my consumption of meat, let's really think about that one. Bacon, pork chops, ribeyes, just meat. Even rattlesnake is delicious. Just meat. If it's causing someone to stumble, I will never eat it again. That's how pressing the goal was for him. Not just for him as a work, as a minister, as a servant of Christ, but to reach people. There's something in our lives that's stopping us from reaching people. I believe this is referring back to their petty squabbles. This is how serious your squabble is, you guys. This is how serious this little squabbling is. Do we have that process of self-renunciation? Do we have that process of self-judgment? Do we take our lives into effect? And every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. That refers back to Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, that all of the sacrifice was going to be salted or seasoned with the salt of the covenant, which was also a really fun passage to work through. Kind of an emblem of the covenant. Why are they putting salt on it? It's important for us to view salt how they viewed salt and not how we view salt. Why do we use salt? Because the soup tastes weird. The stew tastes funny, so we put salt in there. We all have those people in our lives. As soon as they haven't even tasted the dish, haven't even tasted it yet, they reach for one or two things: salt or ketchup. How unpleasing that thing is. That's how we look at salt. I'm just as bad. I have fancy salt. I have salt all the way up through the Scoville scale. I have jalapeno salt, habanero salt, Trinidad Moruga salt. I have ghost pepper salt. I like heat. I like spice, and I like salt. If I die young, you know why. That's not how they used salt. Salt was very important. They didn't have Maytag refrigerators. They didn't have cellars to store their salt. Salt was a preservative. They put salt on everything. They would put salt on the sacrifice. What does that mean, put salt on the sacrifice? As an emblem of the covenant. One, it showed purity. But it also made the treaty or made the commitment irrevocable. Having salt is important. It made it last longer. And every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Do we choose to make our walk or our commitment irrevocable? Salt is good. Matthew chapter 5 verse 13 says that you are the salt. You are salt. You are a preserving agent. Have you ever considered that? When we finish up with Mark, we'll probably be tearing into 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And we see that there is something restraining the Antichrist from coming. And he will not come until first that restrainer is removed. Who is the restrainer? It's the Spirit of God. Where is the Spirit of God? It's in you. You as believers, you are salt. We look at everything, it's like, man, it's getting really bad. Trust me, it's going to get worse. Once you as an influence and you as a preserving agent, when you are removed from the way and it's allowed for just the gates to kind of open up, what do you think is going to happen after that? Do you see yourselves as an influence? Because you should. You really should. So he says salt is good. It's important for us to be an influence, and we're all supposed to be a power for God in the world. Well, God doesn't need me. He can do whatever it is that he wants to. He can do it without me. Absolutely true. But he chooses to do it through us, even as leaky, cracked, and broken vessels as we are. He chooses to do it through us. As believers, we are supposed to be an influence. Petty fighting and squabbling. And you notice it's never over anything important. I don't know that I've ever had a squabble over anyone over generally key doctrinal issues. It's typically over somebody stepping on somebody else's toes. Get over it. It's going to happen. People are people. I'm going to upset you, and odds are at some point you're probably going to upset me. But choosing to be divisive, squabbling, especially over something as ridiculous as a place of power in the church, which even that whole sentence doesn't make much sense, is a very ridiculous thing to fight and to squabble over. So salt is a good thing. But if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? If a salt loses its ability to be salt, how are you going to use it? We wouldn't. If salt isn't actually doing what it's supposed to do, we would throw the salt away. It's no longer salty. What does that mean for us as believers? What does that mean in the text? If you have lost your ability to be an influence, to be a preserving agent because of something you're doing in your life, you're just not going to be able to do it. Plain and simple. Salt is a great thing. That should really boost your spirits this morning. Salt is a good thing. Jesus says very specifically in Matthew chapter 5, you are salt. What is Jesus saying? You are a good thing. But we don't feel like, man, I'm such a dirtbag sometimes. I agree. Everybody's got bad days. But you are a good thing. Be salt. Be a good influence. But if there's something in your life that is stopping you from doing that. Now remember, we're not discussing salvation. The salvation issue is not the concept that's on the table. But your work is. Paul never sat around and pouted on whether or not he was going to be saved. What was Paul's fear? That he wouldn't be able to function as an apostle anymore. That he would be, what's the word I'm looking for? Thank you. That he would be disqualified from the service. Some of us don't even want to be in the service. The thing that broke Paul's heart is a fear we don't even want. That hurts. If there's something in our life that's holding us back from being a good influence, the goal is worth any sacrifice. Cut that thing out of your life. Movies, alcohol, tobacco, your frequenting circles, whatever it is. Those things need to be removed. So salt is good. Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. Have a full commitment to Christ. Have salt in yourselves. Have purity in yourselves. That kind of purity that's found in a child. Be approachable. Be approached. Approach people. Have purity and have peace with one another. If the body is fighting within itself, it's never going to accomplish that purpose. Jerry Lewis, we know who he is, and Jim Carrey doing essentially a reenactment of that in the film Liar Liar. Couldn't speak the lie, so he decided he was going to try and write it. I don't know if we've ever seen that movie. What happened? He ended up writing on his face and all over the walls and everything else. Can you imagine what would happen if your body was fighting against itself? How would that look if you're driving a car or riding on a bicycle? One wants to go left, one wants to go straight. One wants to stop, one wants to speed up. One wants to do a shower, the other one wants to do somersaults. You can't work against yourselves and expect to accomplish the mission. If they are squabbling within themselves, any kind of fight, it's a very ugly thing. And if they're arguing over greatness between the 12, can you imagine what the rest of it, let's just say the 70, were witnessing? They were trying to hide the conversation from Christ, but odds are they weren't hiding it from one another. We never do we? If we want to win, we want to be the greatest, we want to be first, what does culture teach us? Well, I got to rally people to my side. Hey, you think I'm great. We're good buddies. Yeah. Linda, is Linda in here? Is there any Lindas? Perfect. Linda's a dirtbag. Oh, she lies. You have no idea what she said about you. Yeah, let's go against Linda. And then Linda finds out about it. So she's going to find someone that hates Carter. And then you see the divisions and the factions just on the rise. While everybody else is looking, you are more focused on yourself and you have no salt in you. There is no purity, but there is no commitment to Christ. He is not the center of your life. You are. I want to read an excerpt from William Macdonald over this section. To summarize, verse 49 and 50 seem to picture the believer's life as a sacrifice to God, and that makes sense to us. Especially a few weeks ago we discussed Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, that we are the living sacrifice. It is salted with fire, that is mixed with self-judgment and self-renunciation. It is salted with salt, that is offered with a pledge of unalterable devotedness. If the believer goes back on his vows or fails to deal drastically with sinful desires, then his life will be savorless, worthless, and pointless. Therefore, he should eradicate anything from his life that would interfere with his divinely appointed mission, and he should maintain peaceful relations with other believers. I think you really hit the head of the nail on that one. If there's something that's in our lives, and there's days that we just feel held back. Lord, why do I feel like I'm in this dry place? Probably because you've put something ahead of God. We typically use repent, that concept of repentance, and something heavier. It just means to turn away from something and go the opposite direction. If there's something in our lives that's holding us back from Christ, now is the time for repentance. Turn away from that and pursue with full devotedness Christ. And you'd see your desert in your walk turn into an oasis. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for the mornings you have blessed us with as we sit in the ministry of the Word. And I pray, God, that through your Spirit that we would just grow and live by the gospel, to live out the gospel, to be salt. Lord, not just as that preserving agent, not just as an example of purity, but Lord, to show people that there is a better way. Salt does add flavor. While the world has their concept of fun or glory or greatness, we see, Lord, that your way truly is better. And I pray, God, that we would be examples of that. And we love you and we praise you and we pray in your name. Amen.